Hello, everyone. Welcome to an episode or special broadcast today of Potential Paradigms. This is Kanan, and today I wanted to share a conversation with you about the eclipse, which is about to happen in a day and a half. Quite a celestial cosmological event that's happening perhaps after about 50-year cycle. So I wanted to quickly highlight why this conversation might be useful to you with such a luminary as Dhyana, who has this incredible body of work over many decades as a healer in traditional indigenous Indian medicine of Ayurveda and also the astrological ancient science from the Vedic civilization, which is several thousand years old. And I know that some of us are very skeptical when the eclipse happens here in the West. We have watch parties and we get excited, and all of that is great, but there is also a deeper significance to these events. And I myself spent more than 15 years as an engineer in laboratories. I was very skeptical about the influence of the heavenly bodies such as the sun, the moon, and then the planets on us. But at the same time, I've been fascinated since a child. I remember that in the genetics lab that I was in, there were a few studies that I would like to highlight. There was one study where we know that the coral reefs spawn when there is a full moon. And there are genes that have been identified in the coral reef that trigger them to this mating event. And lo and behold, those genes are also present in the human eye. So in a way, we are attuned to the moon. In the female body, the gestation period, the holding of the child in the womb is tied to the lunar cycle. And we wake up with the sun and we go to sleep with the sun. And it's just not limited to humans. There have been studies where birds and species like the salmon can navigate using the Earth's magnetic field. And it's been postulated that humans also might have this capacity, which has become dormant, probably because we live in a materialistic culture where we're not even open to such possibilities. So even if you're a skeptic like me, I welcome you to expand your horizons. So we have done a shorter episode, a timely episode for this upcoming eclipse on whether you should fast, whether you should meditate, whether you should go to a watch party. So I hope that you listen to it and that you benefit from it. And if you do so, please leave a comment. Thank you for tuning in and watching. Okay, welcome, Dhyana ji. Namaste.
Thank you. Namaste, Kananji.
So we're going to be today talking about the upcoming solar eclipse, which is on Monday, the 8th of April. And that would make it today the 6th of April. Yes. And what better person to speak about this big celestial event, which is punctuated by a number of other things, but a great opportunity to have someone with your expertise. And so, yeah, welcome.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
That's a very wonderful, warm introduction. Yeah. So, yes, it's quite a momentous, potent focal point that I think most people are going to be aware of, that we have this total solar eclipse happening very soon, moving right through North America. The United States, it starts where it's visible on land in Mexico, and then it angles up through Texas and across the States towards the East Coast and up into Canada. So for this to be visible here is quite an event, and a lot of people are going out to experience it because it is such a rare and phenomenal thing, really, to experience.
Yeah.
And now, in the Vedic tradition, which is a big part of my orientation, we do not recommend going out and seeing the eclipse, but to stay inside.
Yeah.
To let it be an opportunity for going within, and is actually in the Vedic system and also in many other traditional cultures like the Native Americans. Many of the Native cultures also feel that you should stay inside and be quiet and be in a space of inner meditation or prayer or mantra.
Yeah.
And that's the best use of this amplification that happens
Right.
around these kinds of big cosmic events. Yeah. It's true that the luminaries, the sources of light that we live by, the sun and the moon, are these very essential parts of our life, there's no question. And in the sister science to Vedic Astrology, which is Ayurveda, the holistic medical system, we do pay a great deal of attention to aligning our life, our lifestyle, our rising and, when we sleep, when we get up, when we eat, with what we call the dinacharya, or the daily rhythm, which is in alignment with these sources of energy and light. And when we live that way, we find ourselves, if we're able to, right, in our very fast-paced, externally oriented to technology and everything that goes on in the outer world and the realm of desires, but when we're able to align with these rhythms and these forces, we're healthier, we're happier, we're more supported by the universe. And I know you made a statement when we were talking that you would, you could share.
Really I think we were thinking about the same thing simultaneously. So it was a quote that I heard from a spiritual luminary by the name of Sadhguru, and he said that the cosmos has set the rhythm, and our job is to dance to the rhythm, or learn to dance to the rhythm. And it's okay if you don't dance well, but then the rhythm will crush us. So I think by that he was just referring to this celestial movements of the earth around the sun, and there are wider movements, as you will share with us, about the zodiac, and it just keeps going. And our very birth is because of these, and we should dance with them. I think.
Yes, we should dance with them, and we are dancing with them. And they are creating waves of energies, I would say, that is moving us in ways that we may not be aware of, but these are very powerful forces. And I happened to listen to an interview this morning by these astronomers, and they were talking about the total solar eclipse. And it was really, really interesting, some of the things they had to say. And I really appreciated where there's this intersection of science and this esoteric appreciation of the opportunity that we have with something like a total solar eclipse. And this one, you may know, is a very rare one. It's not only rare because it's visible here where we live, but that it is of a longer duration than we've seen in over 50 years on the planet, I believe. And you could say that in these more traditional or indigenous cultures, what we say is that the sun is dying. The sun goes through a death and rebirth. And so it creates this very distinct ending and new beginning. And that's what a new moon is. anyway. It happens every month, right? The moon gets eclipsed, and then it reemerges. So we have the waxing and the waning moon. So now we've got the sun and the moon, and then this entity called Rahu, the north node of the moon, which is what causes eclipses. The nodes are responsible for the eclipse energy. There's Rahu and Ketu. And there's a very rich mythology in the Vedic tradition about Rahu and Ketu being a serpent or a dragon, you could say.
Before you go into the myth, could you describe to us, my understanding of Rahu and Ketu is that those are two heavenly bodies that are more on the subtle plane in this Vedic astrological transmission.
Yes, thanks. Yeah, so they are not actual physical planets, but we do count them as part of the 9 Navagraha, meaning the 9 planets. Graha is the Sanskrit word. There's so much more to it. It actually means to seize. So the planets have these influences upon us, and they seize us to experience our karmas. And that it is the nodes, Rahu and Ketu, that actually cause us to reincarnate, is what it's considered, because of our karmic history and what's been set in motion. And so, these points are invisible points on the ecliptic that when these astronomical alignments happen, create these kinds of events like eclipses. So they are considered the karmic nodes and are also considered shadow planets. And so what we are looking at is the light being eclipsed and the shadow energy comes forward. And so that can be tricky in a sense, and something to navigate with care, right? And so what's usually recommended is to simplify your life if possible, and you'll have probably a much smoother experience. And if you're able to arrange things to be able to have more of a quiet, introspective experience, that is a very good thing, because the energies are amplified such that it's said that whatever your focus is or your intention at that time, where your awareness is amplified 100-fold.
Wow.
Yeah. So if you're in a state of affirming your intention of what you want to expand in your life, right, then that can be supported in a really, really profound way. And so we say it's a very good time for inner work and practices, and not the best for worldly goals. Like if you wanted to do something major in the external world during an eclipse, there can be hidden, unseen results, perhaps, like if you were signing papers on a contract or a business deal, something like that, it's considered not to be the best time. But of course, in astrology, there's always exceptions for everything. So, if it turns out that's what needs to happen, then that's the karma, right?
Right. Uh-huh.
A surgery, you wouldn't choose to do a surgery on an eclipse, But if you need to have a surgery on an eclipse, then that's obviously the time to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the aspects that I know in the eclipse in the Indian tradition, or Indian continent, is to fast, sort of, or keep very light meals.
Yes.
Because, could you tell us a little bit what the intelligence behind such a thing would be?
Yes. Right. So, especially with a solar eclipse, that's a very good recommendation, because the sun is the source of fire, and we need the fire element to digest our food, and we need to be able to transmute what we're eating, and that is a process of fire, right? And so if we're eating during an eclipse, it is when the source of light and fire in our realm, in our world, is eclipsed. It is said to create digestive issues, right? And also, it's recommended not to cook during an eclipse. And even that if you prepare food before an eclipse, that it would be better to not eat it after the eclipse. So you wouldn't want to cook a big meal before, like the evening before, and plan to eat it for the next, day or two.
Yeah.
Right. So fasting during an eclipse. Now, the sensitive period is considered to be a few hours before and a few hours after. And the exact point of the eclipse here on the West Coast is around 1:30, I believe. I did write those down. But in any case, there is a phase, right,
Yeah.
from about 8:47, I believe, here, until 1:52.
That sounds about right. Yeah.
About right.
Mm-hmm.
And so, no, so that's the time when, if you're able to, just be in nature or just relax, right? And do something that feels like it's supporting your spiritual awakening, because that's what this opportunity is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. In the wider culture, sometimes when we're not tuned into this these modes of information, we can have watch parties. I've heard of
Right.
like big festivals where
Yes.
people go and watch that. And but yeah, if you're open to that, I think it's important to, just like if something like an earthquake is very visible, so you wouldn't have a watch party for an earthquake. Or for a volcanic eruption, right?
Yeah.
There are some daredevils, and as you said,
Yeah.
karma, and maybe for some people that is the awakening to go and be right next to a volcanic eruption. But usually that's not the response for most people to its evacuation,
Yeah.
right? And I think that because this event is somewhat subtle,
Yeah.
unfortunately in some cases, because these days we are so hypnotized by technology and our thought, that we don't know when the sun comes up and when it's a full moon versus a new moon. But for those who are open, you are sharing information that has been around in multiple indigenous traditions,
Yeah.
from India to Egypt to Latin America and
Right.
Greece. So as an engineer in academia, was at least open. And as I was sharing, there's just so many studies of showing how deep our structures are entwined. And as a kid, I was obsessed with an encyclopedia I had, which had all the planetary bodies and the moons of Jupiter.
Yes.
So even that at the level of the mythology that you're sharing, because our conversation is more mythological, right, in a sense,
Yes.
that we're fascinated by these planetary bodies. And even in a way, if we think about it, even that is a very powerful influence, actually.
Yes.
that we find them enigmatic, and different planets, we associate them with different things, even if we're not super into them. Right. And
True.
so yeah, why would you like to? There are more subtle dimensions to this, right? As you were sharing before about the zodiac related with this. Maybe you could tell us what the zodiac is, and then what the current eclipse.
Right. Well, the zodiac are the spaces in the sky that we have identified as being part of the astrological houses. And this eclipse is taking place in the sign of Pisces, which is the last of the 12 zodiac signs.
And if my understanding is correct, or you could please correct me, that the zodiacs are somehow related with the sidereal, which means the stars other than the sun, that in the night sky when we look, they are present.
Yeah.
And do they have something to also do with the journey of the sun during this full year?
Well, the sun moves through each of those signs, and the sun is obviously in the sign of Pisces. This is sidereal, not the Western tropical. Like if you're looking at the, newspapers and you see your birth date, this will give you a different sign as your sun sign, because it is a calculation. There's a whole discussion about these different modes of calculation. But the astrology of if we were to take our Sky Map app, right, and look into the sky, we would see that the planets are in the constellations and the zodiacal signs that are consistent with what we use in Vedic or sidereal astrology. So it's where the planets actually are in the constellations. Yeah. So that's something, and I don't want to go too deeply into that in this conversation.
Yeah.
However, yes, we have the 12 zodiac signs, and Pisces is the end. And so it's considered the journey has come all the way around. We've gathered so much life experience and knowledge and wisdom, and hopefully completed our assignment, right? So we think of Pisces as a sign that has to do with spiritual growth or connection to the cosmos, because we're about to embark into the next whatever, right? So that's a rebirth in a sense, an ending and a new beginning. And not only that, in the Vedic system of astrology, we have something called the 27 lunar mansions, or the nakshatras, which means the fixed stars. And so these nakshatras speak to the moon, so to speak, and they're very rich in symbology, and this eclipse is happening in the very last one. So this really is this turning point energy, and this nakshatra that it's taking place in is a very auspicious, very, very auspicious nakshatra called Revati. And Revati is in the water sign of Pisces. And Revati is this passage, transformative passage as well. And at the very end of Revati, and the beginning of the next sign, where it starts over again in Aries, is this passageway called the Gandanta. So this is happening, the eclipse is occurring very near this place. And the planet Mercury, a lot of people have certainly observed or heard about Mercury retrograde. Well, Mercury just went through the very end of Pisces into Aries and then went retrograde on April 1st. So it's going back and then forward again through this Gandanta point. And so we have a retrograde Mercury in the same house along with Venus. So it's a very, very full sign, excuse me.
If you could tell us what retrograde exactly is, because it's talking about a backward movement, but in physical space-time, the planet actually physically is not moving back. But my understanding is that it seems like there is a backward movement, and that itself has consequences.
Yeah. So the closer it is not literally moving back, but the relative speed is such that it appears to be moving backwards because it slows down and it loses that momentum of being ahead of the sun in a sense. And so a planet, when it goes retrograde, is very close to the sun. Yeah. And so there's a relationship to that. But it is a time that we observe as a way with the indications of what that planet is. Now, Mercury has to do with communication, and it has to do with communication systems, including electronics. So people often find that maybe there's a lot of computer crashes or unusual, not business as usual things going on during a Mercury retrograde. But in the Vedic system, we also say that the planet is stronger because it actually is stronger in the sky, it's brighter, and appears to be closer to the earth. Yes. So it's a strength as well. But, it gets complicated because Mercury is considered not to be in its place of greatest strength in Pisces. Mercury is, strong in the opposite sign, where we just had the lunar eclipse 2 weeks ago in Virgo, where it's considered in its exalted state, where it's really, really excels at all the critical details. Whereas in Pisces, this is a sign that's watery, it's cosmic, it's connected to the celestial realms in many ways, and it's connected to dreams and the ocean and unconditional love with the planet Venus there at this time as well. So that is bringing a blessing, I would say, to this, where there is this opportunity during this eclipse for some very big healing energy. And this eclipse energy is moving from Revati, which is the shepherd that helps people transition, right? And is a protector energy. And then it goes through the Gandant, which is considered a vulnerable place and could even be considered dangerous. For example, when Mercury went retrograde through the Gandant, a week or so.
The Gandant being a transition point?
Yeah, that point at the very end of Pisces and the beginning of Aries. It's the end of a water sign and the beginning of a fire sign. And it's a very drastic change of energy, where not only the sign changes, but the nakshatra changes as well. And so, anyway, I'm kind of getting into a lot of detail here.
With subtlety, but I just have to say that I enjoy this, of course, from the mythological point of view, and the myth, unfortunately, in our currently time, which is radically changing, is considered like something less real, but speaking of mythology in its correct context of these deeper wisdom traditions are more real and allow us to make our thoughts and views more cosmic, right? Because when our view is not cosmic, we can be lost in our head and we could be having planetary wars and famines and pandemics. Whereas if we just raise our head, there's a lot more going on that we are deeply connected to. So thank you for this information. So even as an engineer, as I'm hearing you about the Mercury retrograde and the Gandhan point, which is the transition from between Pisces and Aries, that junction point. And as you were describing, the sidereal zodiac signs are a wider circle where we have the moon around the earth, the earth around the sun, and there are wider circles and heavenly bodies. So the zodiac encapsulates a wider dimension of these movements. And even as if from an engineering standpoint, we're all solar powered. We have solar panels everywhere. So what you're speaking of is, from an engineering standpoint, is a further subtlety where we can, even with the solar rays or light, we can, if we study them, I'm sure that we'll find that there are differences with these things that are happening. So I'm excited from as an engineer and as a yogi. And I hope that the engineers out there, scientists out there, will find this equally invigorating.
Yes, that's wonderful. I love that. So just to finish that part about the Gandhanta, we're going from descending to a new beginning, and then we go into the nakshatra called Ashwin. And that's the twin divine physicians, the celestial physicians. So there is this promise of all this healing energy that can come forward in this dynamic movement forward. So that's the opportunity here. There was this huge earthquake in Taiwan a couple days ago. That is one of the things that can be attributed to these kinds of powerful cosmic events can cause earth changes. And the bridge in Washington, D.C. that collapsed, right? That happened just as Mercury was going retrograde through this Gandhanta point.
Wow.
A few days, right? So there are things that happen in this realm based on what's going on with the planets, and this is something to be aware of. And, there's a strong connection to water with this eclipse it's happening in the sign of Pisces with so many planets, sun, moon, Rahu, Mercury, Venus, and Neptune, which is in the Western astrology system is considered the ruler of Pisces, whereas in the Vedic system, the older traditional, it is Jupiter. And Jupiter is this huge planet that has all those moons and is said to actually hold the sun and all the planets together. There's an energy of protection that we do look to Jupiter for.
I remember in that encyclopedia I was referring to when I was maybe under 10 years of age, that it mentioned that Jupiter was 1,300 times bigger than the Earth. And even that is just fascinating to imagine the possibility of the ginormous, it's like even smaller than a pea compared to a basketball.
You've seen those images, right, of all the planets, and the Earth looks like, the size of a mustard seed compared to,
what's
Jupiter and Saturn, and So, it's a very potent time to be having this discussion, and I enjoyed listening to these astronomers today And I wanted to share that I love that they said many people. So, and if someone wants to go out and view the eclipse, no judgment. It's a personal decision, right? Of course, you want to wear those glasses because what you're looking at, right, is the shadow on the sun, but the sun's rays are still full force. It would be like if you went out into the noonday sun and looked in the sky and just stared at the sun for, a few minutes, right? It could actually blind you, right? So you wear those special glasses. But, one of the things that was mentioned was that people who go to view these, it's a sacred pilgrimage too, right? And that it is a spiritual experience, can be for them as well, with huge amount of emotion to witness, right, what this ginormous force in the universe that can cause our source of light and life to be completely obliterated, so it becomes night.
Yeah, I remember a few, maybe it was last year, where there was a big solar eclipse that happened in Oregon, right? Was visually accessible there. I don't know if it was last year or a couple of years ago.
Yes.
And a friend of mine went there to at that point where it was maximum, somewhere in Oregon, not in a major city. And he took his dad with him, and he showed me a video that while the eclipse was happening, his dad was singing a song, and it was in ecstatic state.
Yes.
And so I followed the more Vedic astrology standpoint to meditate, but I could see that as you were sharing, that I felt that they were really having a profound spiritual experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so there is a place for everything, and our intentions are what perhaps ultimately matter.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And, it was mentioned that all the birds go into the trees like they're going to sleep, and the flowers close up during a total solar eclipse, right? So it affects nature. Everything is affected.
Yeah, that's fascinating that you share that. As you were speaking earlier about some of the earthquakes and tsunami that you mentioned that has happened around this time period.
Yeah.
In all civilizations that have a larger context of history, such as India, coming from that part, I know that before earthquakes, there are people who look for signs in ants and other, like snakes in particular, to see how their behavior shifts. And if their behavior shifts, they have ways to correlate that something like an earthquake or a solar eclipse is about to happen.
Right.
Because some of their senses are much more in tune than ours with these rhythms.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Very tuned in. Right, I know, with the tsunami that happened in Thailand. And, we had friends that were there on the beach, and they had to run. They saw a woman that I know who was there with her family and friends, saw that wave going out, right, and knew they had to get out of there. She knew what it was, right? But the animals fled before that. They were not necessarily drowned in that. They knew, they could feel.
Yeah. Yeah, many species like the salmon and certain birds are known to navigate with the magnetic field.
Yes.
This is a scientific fact.
Right.
And I think now I'm not so much tapped, not in universities, but I spent 12, 13 years in schools. And so I think there was an active research at MIT that there was a possibility that humans actually have what they call geo or magnetoperception. And that actually it's become dormant because first of all, we completely doubt that as a culture, as a civilization, right?
Yeah.
So that is enough. I mean, if you could hear sounds and you think that you can't hear, I think that will probably have an effect on your hearing. So I don't know what the status of that research is, but there were scientists who were studying this.
Right.
And as you're mentioning, we are in this transitionary age where, now it's become not a taboo to study UFOs and alien visitations, even in Harvard and Stanford.
Yeah.
So we're in changing times. Just a decade ago, that was the end of your career, essentially.
Yes. Wow. Okay. Good.
Right.
Yeah. So we're definitely in changing times.
So what you were sharing was just to make it sort of how they say there are these books called making it idiot proof. So we have the solar eclipse, and which is the moon shadowing the sun, and your suggestion is to, maybe in an extreme way, you could fast, do not cook during that time, and also don't use previously cooked meals after the eclipse, ideally. And then you mentioned the further movement, which includes the Zodiac, sidereal, which is Pisces, which is a water sign, and love, with the confluence of planet Venus, which in pop culture we associate with romantic love.
Yes.
So when these forces are coming together, Pisces and Venus, you are saying that there is a possibility of tremendous healing, which we could use in our time, of course.
Yes.
So this is what I'm bookmarking for myself,
Yeah.
to be open to these possibilities in that window from, you said, somewhere around 8 to 2 p.m.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, there is, romantic love, but also in Pisces, it's about unconditional, universal love. And it really is that love with the divine, in a sense. And it's this, very elevated kind of appreciation for the beauty of the senses, right? So art and color and love and, music, all of these things are enhanced. But being it's an eclipse, what can happen is there can be possibly, especially for people who have Pisces, for example, where this is taking place as their sun sign or their moon sign or their rising sign. Depending on the personal placements, it can impact a person very strongly, along with what we call their dasha, their planetary period, the Mahadasha and the Subdasha. If it's aligned with where this is taking place, it can bring very, very major life changes, right? And significantly so. And it can bring a certain amount of, we sometimes call them the chaotic nodes, the nodes of the moon, especially Rahu, which can bring erratic energies or confusion or chaos. There can be an element of chaos, and that's part of, with an eclipse, because the source of light is being obstructed for that period of time, and the unconscious realm or the subconscious realm can come to the surface.
And it seems like what you're indicating is that Rahu and Ketu, these shadow planets, are associated with the unconscious or subconscious?
I would say yes, the subconscious. We say that Rahu is what causes us to incarnate because we have unfulfilled desires. So in the mythology, we say that Rahu and Ketu, they were this cosmic serpent, but they were not immortal. And they were at the table when Vishnu, the gods, were handing out the nectar of immortality. And Rahu's very smart, very clever, disguised himself to look like one of the gods. However, so that he could get this nectar of immortality. And at the last moment, Vishnu saw through the disguise that Rahu put out and threw his discus and cut him in half. So then we ended up with Rahu the head without a body and Ketu the tail without a head, right? And so these are the 2 points on the ecliptic that cause eclipses, and we do track them in our astrological readings to gain a great deal of insight into what is the person here to learn and wants to discover and experience. And then the past, the Ketu part of it, the tail, can be sometimes considered to be headless, and we call it in the Vedic system moksha karaka, or the indicator that brings us to liberation, right? Because the head is not there, the ego is not there, right? But it does represent our past life expertise and our past lives, right? So anyway, it's...
very, very deep terrain.
Yeah.
And you and I are supposed to dive into it, right?
Yes.
I actually maybe can surface this, which was a book that you so kindly gifted me, which is a book on Vedic astrology, because I've been very interested in the subject in my study of the tantras and Sufi mythology. A lot of the yogic and Sufi exercises have different energetic centers, as we know, the chakras, or lataif as they call them in Sufi traditions, and each one of them are actually associated with a planetary body. So that's the yogic exercises themselves. You may not need to know this, but are already indicating that different information centers in the body are somehow microcosms of different macrocosmic heavenly bodies. It's a fascinating connection. And apparently light travels in a timeless fashion. So maybe our connection with these cosmic bodies does not have distance in the way that we think. And their movements could reflect in us very directly.
Wow, that's a really great insight. I like that.
Just a thought that came to me a long time ago. One of my teachers said to me, in a very different context, that our minds are already cosmic. He was pointing at that, and he gave this example that struck me at the time, where I was really embedded in academia. And he said, on a hot day, you have a thought, I want to drink a cold beer. And you go and grab a cold beer and you enjoy it. But he said, is that thought because you thought it, or because it was hot? So if, in fact, as a scientist, I would say it was because the heat has something to do with the thought being triggered. And if I look at the source of that heat, that's the sun and planetary positions.
Right.
So even that thought is a cosmic thought. It's not localized in my head.
Yes, we get very identified with our thoughts, thinking that we're the thinker, right?
Yeah.
And so there is such a thing as critical thinking. But a lot of it is playing out, what's been imprinted, right? And so these samskaras, or these past inherited tendencies, are the opportunity, I would say, in a cosmic event like this, is to actually be able to wipe the slate clean in some regards if you align yourself with that possibility. And this one is considered a very, very big, total, rare solar eclipse. And so the opportunity really is to let go of the things in our life that are not serving us, right? And to open to the habits and the, practices or intentions that we have. So this is a rebirth time. And we just had Easter, and yeah, it's a potent time.
Yeah, yeah, amazing.
Yeah,
Well, thank you so much. I know that
yeah.
we wanted to share this, and through your wisdom, all that you've imbibed over multiple decades, in a timely fashion before the eclipse happens. So this
Yes.
will go out, and maybe if I request you to, just like as you were sharing with me a video of one of your teachers or former teachers, if you had to give in a minute or two, 3 minutes,
Yeah.
highlights of anything that you like. It could be how it influences why was this significant and stuff, and like a sort of a synthesis of.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Sure. Okay. So this new moon, which is occurring Monday on the moon's day, is also a total solar eclipse, and it is visible here in the United States. And so it gives us an even greater impact, even though it's an eclipse that is having perhaps some effect on the whole world. It is more pronounced here. And being the sun represents governments, for example, it'll be an interesting year here in the U.S. with the presidential election this fall. But on top of that, this new moon is considered the new year that is used in the Vedic Astrology to do a chart for the year. And so the fact that it's this total solar eclipse is really quite significant in terms of the predictions probably that will arise out of this chart that's cast for the year here. So that's a pretty interesting piece. So that's not really summarizing, but it is something that kind of takes it into the import, I would say, of how this is unfolding. And, we'll see.
Yeah.
Hopefully everyone will stay safe. This is occurring in a water sign, so there is some caution to be aware of water. I know there's Niagara Falls is one of the points in the U.S. that people are going to as a destination, this huge water place, and they are already have declared it a state of emergency there, with so many people coming, to be able to have the systems in place for any possible upheaval. So probably not the best place to buy a big body of water that could be tumultuous to experience the eclipse. But for the emotional nature, I would say it's very profound and an opportunity for deep soul level healing of past traumas, both culturally and individually. That the completion of something that you feel you're ready to move on with is very strong, and to be able to look towards a bright future that really, really is allowing the optimal qualities that you want to manifest to come forward in your life, and to make good choices for yourself and align more with these forces of nature. And that's where Ayurveda comes in. It's a really beautiful holistic science to help us, align with the elements and create balance and a rhythm that's connected to these greater forces.
Yeah, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, you already gave us so much depth, or revealed that layer upon layer we can enter into our connection with the spheres. And earlier you mentioned perhaps meditation and music as well. And as you were mentioning music, it reminded me of the prophet Plato in the Greek system, or the philosopher Plato. And Plato was is very well known here in the West, right? And a lot of his work was around music, around the notes, the fifth and the third. And they, for him, and prophets in this lineage, they were connected with the spheres. Hence the term, the music of the spheres.
Yes.
So music has that connection with the frequencies of planets.
Absolutely.
And I'm looking forward to sharing this with everybody later today.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Kananji.
Thank you.
Yes.
My pleasure.